just back on this contract and legal engagement. So I mean, I didn't realise at the time when I asked these questions on 15 February that a decision was so imminent. I mean, these things aren't shared with members of the opposition, so I didn't have the benefit of an inside run, a rails run. But I did ask you at the time about the nature and extent of the engagement with other companies, because that was something that you had offered up in an answer, that there had been an EOI.
I believe you asked me if there had been, and I confirmed that
that's right. That's right. And you said that there'd been, I think, 21.
Yes.
Yeah. So how many of those, and does that include PSI?
PsiQuantum was not invited to participate in the EOI.
Because it had its own process?
Because we'd already undertaken initial due diligence, and this was to test the market further.
Yeah, fair enough. So 21 companies, not including PSI. How many of those 21 engaged with King & Wood Mallesons?
So the department, with the support of others, organised the market testing process. There was not any engagement between the companies and King & Wood Mallesons in that EOI process.
Okay, so the only company that engaged with King & Wood Mallesons was PsiQuantum.
So the department led the negotiations and the process with PsiQuantum. We drew on expert technical advice, commercial advice, legal advice, national security advice, probity advice, technical specifications, etc. So we had we set up a task force. We had a governance structure within government, Band 3 process, and so we ran that process. And the engagement of King & Wood Mallesons with the company kind of ramped up depending on what happened at that in the early stages. They were providing advice to us, not engaging in contract negotiations or anything like that, because as I mentioned before, we went through various increasing degrees of due diligence. The first phase occurring prior to June 2023, post June 2023. There was a more intensive process that involved the EOI process or market testing process, as well as additional information from PsiQuantum.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until we moved later in the process that we went to more intensive testing, and that
Okay.
involved more direct engagement with PsiQuantum.
Okay. Did PsiQuantum engage with King & Wood Mallesons?
Not directly without the involvement of the department. They had lawyers of their own.
But
and
did they engage?
Commercial advisors that they engaged.
Yeah.
And so, as these things usually operate, there are layers in any commercial negotiation between
that.
principals and then between lawyers and between commercial negotiation.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Did PsiQuantum's lawyers engage with King & Wood Mallesons with the department?
Yeah, there was always a department member.
Yeah.
As part of that process, as there is usually, because the department was leading this process and we were in charge at all points in time.
And the 21 other companies did not engage with King & Wood Mallesons in any form?
They engaged with the department, just like PsiQuantum did.
Okay, but not with King & Wood?
They engaged with the department, just like PsiQuantum did.
Okay, so did PsiQuantum's lawyers engage with King & Wood Mallesons in conjunction with the department?
Yes.
I would hope so, given how much money's been spent.
Yes, clearly.
They did, okay. But the other companies didn't?
Because the government decided to go forward with PsiQuantum, and that's when we stepped up engagements with the company. So I just want to be really clear about the phasings here, that the government gave us the instruction to proceed with testing the market
Yep.
and continuing discussions on a non-binding basis with PsiQuantum. Both those, that the expressions of interest process was our main focus, and then there was a subsequent decision to proceed with all the information available for government, all the factors that you would expect to consider, and then after that there was an intensive process of going through and negotiating. There was still no final decision. There was quite a lot to work through to make sure that we had appropriate opportunities for Australia, and also protect if there was any kind of risks that we needed to manage. And so that intensive discussion kind of happened from sort of September, February, etc. And then there was a subsequent decision about conditional negotiations, and we went into a more detailed legal, contractual, commercial negotiation, and a final decision. A final decision was taken later, and then the government was announced, and then we finalised contractual arrangements.
I understand all that, but what is clear from that is that the only company that had an engagement with King & Wood in this way was PsiQuantum. The other companies were part of the EOI, but they never got engaged in a due diligence process with King & Wood. That's what I take from this.
So I want to be very clear here that the assessment, there was a first...
And that was the evidence that Mr McGregor gave about 10 minutes ago.
I would like to make sure it's very well understood, because your characterisation is not the same as my understanding of the process. So we did a first phase of discussions with PsiQuantum, joint with Queensland Government, engaging experts to decide whether there should or shouldn't be any further consideration. There was a decision of government to consider it further. When was that first phase? So that first phase was from the sort of formal due diligence phase 1, as was February to May 2023.
Feb 23?
Yeah.
That's when the task force was set up as well, or not?
No, the task force was set up in June.
June.
So we did that through our existing processes, as we would normally do with other business proposals that come. The government had received a detailed proposition. We considered it in our usual way. When the government decided they might want to consider it further, at that point we set up the task force. We were instructed to do a market testing. We did a market testing. We did market testing. We did a bit more on PsiQuantum, but we'd already done a significant amount of done work on that before. We then went to government with the package of information from the EOI and additional information from PsiQuantum, compare and contrast. That involved a kind of sequence of technical advice, commercial advice, legal advice. We then, there was a process for government to consider all that information on a level playing field. They then decided they wanted to go further, and then we went another step further. There was another series of gatekeeping decision-making, and then we went to another level, and then another series of gatekeeping, and then we went to another level. So there were quite a few processes in this journey, as you would expect for an investment of this significance and for the opportunities it presents for Australia.